Hey, before we begin, I just shot the video, but I want to make sure that just in case this lesson is a companion to the video I just made last week about the Mixo-Dorian blues scale. So if you haven't seen that, you might want to watch this first because this might make a lot of sense afterwards. But if not, you can watch this and then watch it afterwards. I'll stop talking, on to the video. Alright, welcome back to another episode of StichMethod. This one's going to be simplistic in nature, but hopefully provide you with a really good palette of how to write a really cool groove for either yourself or a band so that you guys can work on jamming together or just grooving together. This lesson comes from my previous lesson, which was truly understanding the Mixo-Dorian blues scale. And some of the questions I got was, hey Ian, how do you compose your loops for the videos? And I turned that question into, well, how does anyone create a groove that they could write some stuff on or practice their scales with or practice making melodies with? And so before we begin, I'll talk for a second. The idea of a groove for jamming is different than like a groove in general. A groove in general is not going to work for this concept. What I mean by that is, you know, if you walk into a band scenario or if you want to practice soloing and you say, hey guys, I came up with this groove and it goes like this, like... And people are like, okay, but what that does is that makes everything limited. The drummer has to follow it, the bass player, the guitar player, keyboard player, they all have to follow what you're doing, and it's not going to be liberating. Your job in writing a groove for people to jam on is to give them a wide enough funnel that everybody can get in and have their space, and as they work together, excuse me, as they work together, they can start creating music and melodies that work together and then pushing that jam someplace else. And so that's the goal of this, and that's how I treat my backing tracks. And if you want to do the same with your band or yourself, this is how you do it, especially with the Mixo-Dorian blues scale. So let's get right down to it now. The first thing we're going to do is take a look at that word mixo, mixo meaning 5. So what we're going to do is we're going to write a chord progression on the fifth chord of a key. And I didn't pick a key yet, so let's just pick the key of D. And now I'll put up the chords in the key of D right about here somewhere, and you'll see that the 5th chord is an A. Now that means that we're going to start writing this progression on the A, on the A chord, excuse me, in the key of D. So that's the A chord right here. Now I'll tell you the entire time in this video that rhythm is your friend. The rhythm of everything is your friend. If you just came into a band setting, you said, hey, I wrote a new song or a new groove, try writing something over this, and you're... it's not too exciting. So if you say, hey, you guys can use the Mixo-Dorian blues scale over this groove, and you pick some rhythm like... And so you can use the one chord right now just to create some rhythmic grooves and have everybody kind of start entering in, and you can definitely solo on top of that with your Mixo-Dorian blues scale. That would be an A Mixo-Dorian. Let me give the example of that. Let me get a loop going. Sorry, my cables were tied up. Here we go. I'm going to loop that A chord, that groove. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on my distortion and stuff, and I'm going to take a solo of my A Mixo-Dorian blues scale. I can sit and do this forever. Excuse me. My allergies are still kicking my butt. So that's just one way to do it. That's just one way. It gets so much, we're going to talk about a lot. I know it's very simple, but just vamping the 5 chord, giving it some rhythm. Next option is introducing more chords. Now, you don't want to introduce a lot of chords. If you're trying to create a groove where everybody can sink in, dip their toes in and feel comfortable, you're talking 2, maybe 3 chords at most. So when you're thinking Mixolydian, you want to think of like the 5, the 4, and the 1. Many songs that you and I both know groove and jam on either a 5-4 or 5-1 progression. So it's up to you again to use your rhythm factor, to think of different rhythms. Now on my channel I talk a lot about dividing up your 3 strings, the thick strings like a kick drum, and the higher strings like a snare. And you can think of a drum beat or listen to a drum beat and divide up into that. And so in this case I'll use a 5-4. Now there are many songs that use 5-4s, but now I got to think of something that has a distinct rhythm to it. So let's see. right? And now it's like, okay, you own that, the rhythm of it. Rhythm is infinite when you think of all different possibilities, but your chord choices are pretty, much there. And again, your rhythm is going to help out. So if I took that Mixolydian progression, which is just a 5 to a 4, it's A to G, and I did like... And now, like, if I presented that to a band or myself on a looper, it forces my riffs now to be a little bit different based on the rhythm. You get the idea. And so, again, that is a prime groove for a Mixo-Dorian blues scale starting on A. And then, giving it some rhythm, and everyone else can use that rhythm to kind of shape what they're doing. The last thing I'll talk about, very briefly, about writing something with the Mixolydian progression is that 5 chord can also be played as a dominant 7th chord, an A7. And you can sit on the A7, boom, boom, you can just do it like that, and you can try, using the dominant 7th instead of the A, maybe do 5-1. Loop it and you present it to your band and they'll groove on it, especially with the Mixo-Dorian blues scale. Let's keep on moving forward. We're going to talk about the Dorian side of things. With a Mixo-Dorian blues scale, you can write in the Dorian progression, as I mentioned in the video. And so, well, if we're in the key of D, you hear those chords again, Dorian means 2, so we got to start writing something, I don't know if it's here or there, with the E minor. And so that means that the E minor becomes our first chord of the progression, and then, you can put a D in, you put A. With Dorian backing tracks, it's a lot looser. You can use any chord from the key if you want, but some sound better than others to your ear. And so, in this case, some very common Dorian ones I talk about on the channel all the time, 2 to 5. In this case, would be E minor to A. Okay? And so, think of some cool rhythms, like... I like that. Let me see if I can get a loop of that. And I'll loop that and just show you, like... So now I've started on the E minor in the key of D. It's E Dorian. So I'll use my E Mixo-Dorian blues scale. And again, like, listen to the rhythm, pretend you're in a band, and see, like... And you can just sit and just have so much fun over that. Now, that was just a simple start of a 2 to a 5. You can do 2 to a 1. If you were a fan of some of the bands that I'm a fan of, you'll hear some familiar stuff in the 2-1, like... But listen how interesting that rhythm is, all right? And so, really, it's easier to write a Dorian backing track because the 2 starts it off and you can do anything. I will say, some chord progressions, I noticed that a 2 to a 6, it kind of demands a smoother, kind of slower, like... Some things demand a slower tempo, and so use your ears. So what I do is I just create either, a Mixolydian or a Dorian backing track that I like. I kind of play around, I put some cool rhythm to it, and then I'll loop it, and I'll use it on my channel for a backing track for one of my lessons. Now, there's a third option you can do, and there's more than 3 options, but I'm just going to get you started on writing some good grooves. And it's the Dorian Mixolydian switcheroo. And a lot of my favorite bands use this trick, and you can too. Which is if you take that Dorian progression, if I take like a 2 to a 5-1, like 2-5-1, 2-5-1, which would be E minor, A, and D. Because the Mixo-Dorian blues scale switches the major thirds, Mixo having a major third and Dorian having a minor third, you can switch around your chords where this would want to be a minor. You can now make this a 7 chord, E7, excuse me. And what happens is that minor third gets raised to a major third. It's still going to work with your scale. So instead of doing a 2-5-1, you can do a 2 chord as a 7th, and then 5-1. And this gives a little bit of a cool flavor, and I can loop it. and you'll hear it. You know, it has a little bit of a different bite, but it works. And so you can go like. Now, you have that loop going. Let me just raise the volume on that loop really quick. I feel like I knocked it down. There we go. And then, you know, I start on the E7, so I'll use my E Mixolydian blues scale. Oh. And so you now have the power to combine things with just this basic knowledge to writing your own grooves for a band or your own backing track. So I just, you know, watch the video on my Mixolydian blues scale first. That's an important thing if you haven't seen it. And then try writing some backing tracks and bring those grooves to your band. How many times can I say it? Anyway, if you like this stuff, share it. If you don't like it, I'm sorry. And if you do like it again, subscribe. I'll stop talking. Thank you again for watching another episode of StichMethod. Rock and roll. Goodbye.